Dog fans, we got John Garcia on the show today talking recruiting, flip season, portal. It's a crazy time of year, and he's here to break down a couple of 5 stars, a couple of great kids coming into Athens, as well as many more. John, I don't know if you know, we actually had a fan talk to us this week and said, when is John Garcia getting back? And we said this week. So we're going to talk about all that and more here on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I am Clint. This is Locked On Bulldogs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline, the official sportsbook of Locked On Bulldogs. And today we welcome in John Garcia, who's a recruiting guru, insider, all things extraordinaire. This guy hits every single time he slaps. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. We're getting close, Clint. This is the final stretch of the recruiting cycle. So, Georgia's about to do what Georgia does. So I'm excited to talk about it.
And what we do is we just haul in. We just are selfish. We're like hungry hippos. We just want to grab all them 5 stars, all them 4 stars, bring them in. So today we're going to hit those 3 topics. We're going to hit a couple of 5 stars. We're going to hit maybe some extra room. I don't know if you guys have seen, but Georgia's list of commitments so far is less than other schools. They're in the top 5. The average of rating for our guys is a little bit higher because of that. And then we're going to talk about flip season. So let's start with Mpemba. John, we got an announcement this week, a 5-star kid off the edge. Again, you've been on here multiple times, us talking about Kirby's emphasis on the edge. And now we get another guy, another cat who is just a beast, a physical freak with tenacity over on the edge. Tell us what dog fans should be excited about getting Mpemba onto this recruiting class.
Well, Sam Mpemba is one of the twitchier athletes or football players we've scouted in the last few cycles. And it has translated to a lot of positivity for him at IMG Academy, so much so that he backed up number 1 tight end Jaleel Skinner as a junior on that side of the ball. And then in the spring shifted over to defensive end. And man, he has hit the ground running at that position as well as any recruit we've watched at that school. Absolutely an alpha edge rusher. Again, the first step is really uncanny, but he also packages this 6'5", 245-pound chiseled frame that provides a lot of power. And he's beginning to round the corner from a technical standpoint. He's working underneath. He's got a good bull rush despite his slender frame, and he's starting to figure out just those extra ins and outs of the pass rushing position that helps you really put pressure on an offensive tackle. So he will threaten everyone that tries to block him with speed, but he's begun working on many other counters to that. And it's something that is going to culminate in whether it's a specialist role or a full-time role down the line. He will be a problem. Reminds me a lot of a former IMG player himself, Nolan Smith, coming out of high school, where you're like, man, his first trick is so good, it almost doesn't matter what else he can do. But if he develops the rest, if he can extend, if he could set the edge, if he could play with better leverage, all those things, this guy could be a problem. And we've obviously seen Smith ascend to that point, especially the last year and a half. I think Sam Mpemba can do that, but he's physically a little bit more gifted at the same stage, which is really kind of just scary to talk about, to be honest.
And I think that's what's so freakish about this. You said Nolan Smith, and dog fans, or college football fans, I should say, not dog fans, college football fans will get on here and talk about sack numbers. And we try to explain what chaos and what rush and what pressure means. Because college football, you got the likes of Tennessee, which is a 1.5 second drop back. It's a 1 read and go, something like that. Sacks are not the same statistic as the NFL. We've talked about Nolan Smith being one of the absolute wreckers on the edge because no one gets outside of him on a run. That guy is the most anchor-like guy on the line, and he does it with these moves, with this set, with this technique, as well as physicality. So here's another guy. You said 6'5", 245, and chiseled, by the way, my gosh, like chiseled, not just like, oh, okay, cool. No, this guy is...
Yeah, it's another level, like across sports, another level, yeah.
Yes, it's kind of like Greek Freak
Yeah.
Giannis in the NBA type comparison when you talk about his physical skills. And then you talk about getting into Georgia, and we have had this lineage now. Robert Beal was a kid that, he's going to get drafted. Probably he didn't have the year that we were expecting to, but still a solid year. He's a solid guy, but he wasn't ever that freak twitch guy. Now all of a sudden you get him in. Michael Williams comes in, gets all SEC freshman honors, and plays a significant role, and he's going to develop. And Daniel and I were talking. Chaz has not played out on the edge like we thought he was. He needs a lot more seasoning, a lot more. All of a sudden, Mpimba comes in, and he's got a shot day one, just like Michael Williams had. Exact same scenario to get out there and showcase these abilities and really, really train well. And you talked about being on the offensive side. So again, this is the type of athletes that Kirby's bringing in. So maybe that's my question, John. I think he can pull a Michael and be on the field day one. It sounds like you're saying the same thing, correct?
Yeah, we've just seen so much growth since the spring. So just under the last year or so, first of all, everybody was like, man, when are you going to play defense? Like, tight end is fun. We get it. IMG is going to spread you out, throw the ball. Great.
Yeah.
He was a junior, so you kind of understood that. But everybody was waiting for the switch. And what's kind of been an addition to that switch is he's really tight with Francis Mauigoa, maybe the best offensive lineman in the country, who's also at IMG. I mean, those guys were tied at the hip, and they worked like they were tied at the hip. And Francis says, look, man, I've been at IMG for a couple of years. I've blocked literally the best pass rushers in the country. He's like, that guy gives me the most problems. And he does so every single day. So that's where it really gets fascinating, the back and forth between the two, because they're opposites, right? Mpemba, long, lean, chiseled, speed. Mauigoa, compact, low to the ground, lower body dominant, leverage type player. So they counter each other's strengths. And both players are like, hey, this guy really works me. So I think when we talk about a kid switching positions and sides of the ball, normally you'd be like, yeah, it's going to take some time. But when it's at IMG and it's against those players in practice and against those other players on Friday nights with the success we've seen from Mpemba, I think we can remove some of that trajectory talk and talk about him making an impact right now, because on top of the skill set physically, as we said, he's ready to go today in terms of height, weight, speed, physicality. He's ready to go right now. So I think all of those traits combined, it's going to be pretty hard to keep him off of some type of pass rushing rotation. Although we know Georgia's been elite at edge prospects and recruiting edge prospects and developing more. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple more that are on the board. So it's going to be fascinating down the stretch. But again, Mpemba is one of the best in the country right now, and we know his best football is still well ahead.
That's exactly right. And this is very, very similar to what Kirby has done in the past with guys coming in that are maybe mispositioned. And I don't want to put that on the kid in IMG, what they were doing. Again, you have a physical freak. You're just going to put them on the field to make plays. That's what playmakers do, and that's what football's all about. But if you get this kid a year head start on it before coming into Georgia, before that weight program, before the defensive line coach and Shu and everybody else on the defensive side get a hold of them, that's a recipe for great things ahead. We're going to come back after this. I'm going to ask John a few more things about this recruiting class. But first, I want you about BetOnline. BetOnline is your sportsbook experts. They are the official sportsbook of Locked On Podcasts. That's where Daniel and I, my co-host of you, is here. Bowl season's here, which is the greatest time of year. So we're going to have all them bowl predictions coming out. We're going to do over-unders. We're going to do game lines, parlays. Weldon Brothers, I know you out there, and I know that tomorrow you're hoping a ticket is punched for Stetson's Heisman that you took out before the season. I don't think it's going to hit. I'm glad he's there. But if it does, your boys are coming to SoFi with you if we make it there, and you're paying for it, Weldon Brothers. And where they made all these bets is BetOnline, your sportsbook experts. I mentioned at the beginning of this that Georgia's recruiting class so far has less number of recruits than others, than the likes of Alabama or Notre Dame or Clemson and so on and so forth. I think we're at 22, depending on what site you're at, depending on what's the official, and portal season's hitting. So things are much more in flux than they were before. But we have some room to grow this recruiting class, John. Where does Kirby and the staff go to fill those positions that we have open?
That's a great question. I think a lot of defensive players are kind of where I'm looking. Recently they've obviously flipped Anthony Evans, the wide receiver. So yes. I think that position is a bit short up. Earlier in the cycle, you flip Roderick Robinson from UCLA. Running back was kind of a big question mark. I think mid-season, that question has been answered. Maybe there's another addition coming at that position, but I'm really looking on defense. I think edge rusher is still a priority. You mentioned Mpemba. Who's next, right? Damon Wilson is very much in the crosshairs. We talked about Mateo Uiagalelei at one point reaching out to Georgia. So those spots are extremely coveted, literally coast to coast. I think they addressed that there. I think Damon Wilson's got a whole lot of UGA buzz next to him right now. So if they can close there, that would be a big deal. And then I'm looking in the secondary. I think there's more room for a true corner or two to be added to this class. We've seen a lot of safety targets and hybrid targets kind of come in and out of the crosshairs for Georgia. But, do they bring back Daniel Harris? How does that look down the stretch in the secondary? Very curious there as well. And of course, you can never rule them out for adding another offensive lineman. I know they just flipped the UCF prospect, who's very good, by the way, very promising player, incredibly physically imposing, but maybe there's room for another addition on that front. So I think it's going to be a little bit more defensive laden. Again, edge rusher for me is where I'm focused the most, because I think that's where they can splash the most down the stretch. And by the looks of it, they got a really nice chance to.
And I think that's what Dog fans, if you're looking at this class coming up and you look at what Georgia has on the offensive side, wide receiver, tight end, very young. Brock Bowers is back for another year. We got Oscar Delp behind that. We got Dylan Bell on the outside. We got Rosemary Jackson, who we'll see what he's going to do coming back or not and what happens there. But we have quarterbacks stacked up. We think one's going to hit the transfer portal. One of those guys backing up don't want to sit behind Carson Beck, Gunnar Stockton, Brock Vandegrift. And running back, we got guys coming back. Dejon Edwards and Robinson are shirt up there. So we look at defensive side. Christopher Smith is leaving. Tyke Smith, as well as Keely Ringo. Those are three contributors in the secondary. And we've seen Malachi Starks already get in there again, all SEC freshman. So, and then the line I mentioned, I think portal is going to be key for Georgia just for depth. Not for instant impact, just for depth to get in there, because we have some younger guys coming in and some other big cats, this coast to coast thing that you're talking about getting in there. So yes, secondary is going to be key. I think guys like Rousseau, I think those days are gone. I think he's elsewhere, and just Georgia fans live with it, embrace it. It is what it is. But those lines, the trenches, this is where Kirby makes his bread and butter, right? He said so time and time again. Where do you figure Georgia ending up when all is said and done? I know last year you did a predictions of who's going to finish with the top 5 class. Where do you predict Georgia? It's early on, but where do you predict them to finish?
I think they're still in the same range, probably more top 3-ish to me, because as you mentioned, one, there's room, right? I think that's the key. Like Notre Dame is pretty darn full. I think Bama's got maybe 2-3 spots at the most. Those two in-state kids certainly are going to have a spot there. So in terms of the schools in the mix, Texas is more about them holding on to their commits more so than adding some new players. So I do think that of those contenders, I think Georgia's got the most room to improve. And on top of that, of course, as we said, big-time players still on the board, right? There's a running back from NC State that's on flip watch. We mentioned Damon Wilson as a pass rushing prospect who could very well end up in this class. I mean, there's still flirtations with Nicholas Harbor, who won't sign until February. So that could be kind of the final piece to the puzzle. Jordan Hall is visiting this weekend. That's kind of a cocktail party battle, right? Georgia versus Florida for a Jacksonville kid, which is very fitting in my opinion. He was at UF, I believe, last weekend. Now at Georgia this weekend, and he's committing here in the next week or so. So I think there's still a lot of room for Georgia to improve this class. And obviously down the stretch, it's about the closers. Who can close on the recruiting trail? We know Kirby Smart, that staff is as good or better than just about any staff that's out there. So especially when it's a defensive recruit on the board, you just feel like they're not going to strike out very often. So I think you add an edge player, you probably add another interior player, and then we'll see what else Georgia can add on top of that. Maybe a running back, maybe a defensive back. But if you're adding 2 or 3 more guys, it's going to be hard to keep Georgia off that number 1 spot unless Alabama hits like a perfect close down the stretch, which is certainly possible under Nick Saban. But obviously recruiting is fluid, so strange things happen here down the stretch.
Strange things happen. We're going to get into the last segment about flip seasons, as well as kind of getting your thoughts on the portal game, because we've told our listeners again, time and time again, they all want to talk about how portal's ruining the game, and we just tell them you're a fan of the wrong sport. Then, if that's your take, like, get on out of here. It's part of it. We're going to talk about how that affects recruiting, but I think you're right. I think Kirby has a couple of key positions that are going to be kind of the cabinet filling, kind of the bread and butter, what you just need. And then on top of that, it's then just go out and have some fun. Like, who do you think you can grab that's going to be a high ceiling guy? My prediction is Alabama finishes 1. Dog fans, I'm sorry. I think they got those couple in-state kids that are going to go there. I think that's going to catapult them.
Tough to beat. Yeah.
It's really tough to beat. And you know what? Again, he's the GOAT, guys. Nick Saban is the GOAT. If we're finishing second to him, he's on the decline. I think the arrow's pointing down, arrow's pointing up for us. Don't get too dismayed by that, because the kids in this are good. And running back or another exciting prospect. I know that kid out of Notre Dame just decommitted, running back.
Yeah, Edwards, big time player. Yeah,
big time player. If you haven't seen that, I saw that at first. I was like, oh, that's not a big deal. And then I went and saw highlights, and I said, oh, never mind. That's a big time deal. And the guy out of UCLA's pocket that we snatched as well. So there are plenty of places to go. We're excited for that. I'm going to come back with John and ask about portal season as well as flip season, some names to keep a hold of right after this. All right, John, I teased before we went to break that we're looking at the portal. And so again, maybe just your thoughts first. How does recruiting high school players differ from recruiting portal players in your estimation as you're talking to these people? What changes there?
Oh, man, it's the timeline. That thing is so fast for portal players. There were kids last year I talked to who they went about 48 hours through their entire portal recruiting process before making that next verbal commitment. And we've seen some of that already happen this year, right? Cade McNamara goes from Michigan to Iowa, Phil Jerkovich from Boston College to Pitt to replace Keaton Slovis. These big time players know the deal when they go into the portal for the most part. The next layer are the kids who jump in with a hint that, hey, I'm going to be coveted. And then boom, they start getting a bunch of offers. I think Ra Thomas is a great example of that. The receiver from Mississippi State, small school, you follow Alabama kid coming out of high school, has a great year under Mike Leach. And I think every day he's adding another big offer. It's like Auburn, Florida, Ole Miss, Georgia, Florida State. I mean, there's a bunch of Southeastern regional offers that have come for him, and he's already begun visits. So his timeline now, I feel like, will be accelerated. Georgia will get him on campus. Auburn had him on campus on Thursday. I think Ole Miss probably gets a visit in the end there as well. A receiver, a huge need for all three of those programs. So I think it's really about the timeline. That's what changes. How much of the game do you know when you jump into, or before you jump into the portal? And then how much does it change when you are actually in the portal and these schools can begin, legally communicating with you and your camp? So it's really just about that. These dominoes will fly very quickly in the portal. All of the number one players at every position that people are looking at, they're going to start coming off the board very, very quickly, much before the end of bowl season and all of that. So the biggest difference to me is just the timing. You don't have a lot of time to make your pitch. You might not even get a visit. And it doesn't matter as much as it does in high school, where you're like, I need this official visit from prospect X to be in the game. Not necessarily the case in the portal, because these kids are older, they're more mature, and they know what they're getting, especially at a brand like Georgia's, right? You know what you're getting with that program. And a lot of the reason people jump into the portal is to have an elevated spotlight. And obviously that spotlight doesn't get much bigger than the one in Athens, Georgia. So I think it's really about that accelerated timeline and how quickly programs can prioritize these portal players versus high school, where, I mean, you're recruiting kids for 2, 3, 4 years at different points. Michael Williams was recruited probably for 72 months. It felt like, as a high schooler, you won the recruitment, but it is a long-term battle there. It is not the same in the portal. It is much more of a, almost like mercenary work. It's like, hey, can you fit what we do? Yes. Okay. Come take a visit. All right, let's do this. Let's enroll, get ready for spring ball. And here we go. So that's really the biggest difference. It can change at the drop of a hat. And, by the time we talk about it and this recording comes out, there'll be another big portal or two. So it's just the nature of the game. While the carousel's spinning, while teams are trying to finish recruiting, they've also got to navigate this simultaneously. So December, especially for teams like Georgia that have a lot to play for, it's just crazy. It's crazy for these college coaches, but that speed of the portal probably helps in those scenarios because you get clarity one way or the other.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think recruiting is much like a courtship. If you're like talking like dating romance, like it is a long endeavor. You got to win somebody over, and then portal is more like you're dating in your like mid 30s, and you know what you're looking for, and you're like, that's what I'm looking for. Hey, we good? We've gone. Hey, let's wrap this thing up. Let's do something. That's more what it's like, and it's really good for a team like Georgia. You talk about rah-rah. I think a guy like him. It's all over. Todd Monken is on TV. You see what you're getting when you're like, oh, I could do that. Brock Bowers is getting all of a sudden the recruiting's out there. You don't have to sit down with mom and dad and auntie and uncle and everybody else. You don't have to do in-home visits. It is much quicker. And I think it does produce, you mentioned Keaton Slovis moving on, and all of a sudden BC going to Pitt. It's simply because you have a need. You see what I can do. I know your system. Let's make it work. It's that simple. And it certainly helps, I think, in my understanding, Georgia, because no one's coming in. There's no delusion. If a tight end wants to come in and thinks he's going to get playing time over Brock Bowers, you're foolish. Like go somewhere else. Go to Texas or whatever you have. So it really helps. As we finish up, John, give us a flip that we should watch because Kirby is a closer. What's a closing statement that he might be able to give us?
Yeah, I mean, how about Kyron Jones visiting this weekend? The NC State verbal commitment, a kid who has really upped his own stock as a senior, had a monster track season in the spring. I think he won the 1 and the 2 in the state of North Carolina, which obviously produces great players. A lot of Georgia greats came from the Tar Heel State. Had a great spring and then has followed it up with a huge senior season at Charlotte Christian. Got the NC State visit and offer, committed right after that at the beginning of the season. And then other schools were like, okay, well, it's not like you've been committed very long. They've gone through some transition at NC State, lost their offensive coordinator. The door is kind of open here. So other schools have jumped in. Georgia now going to get him on campus this weekend for an official visit. We know Georgia likes running backs in pairs. That's really been the MO going back to Mark Richt, I would say. You like running backs in pairs. You got Roderick Robinson on board. Can you pair him with a smaller, faster, more dynamic and balanced Kyron Jones or someone else? You mentioned Edwards, who just decommitted from Notre Dame. That would still be considered a flip when he makes another decision. I think that's where, Georgia has been so good. And now you're getting one of these guys on campus with a whole, 10, 12 days to go until signing day. So again, it's about the close, and Georgia just does it better than most. So from the flip watch perspective, I've got my eye on Jones because he's just the next committed prospect to take that visit.
Yep. We do love running backs out of the Tar Heel State. We'll take them all. They have panned out well. And I think just recruits from that area as well, kind of that Atlantic coastal Swift from Philly and all of that. I think it is a source. And we got now a recruit on staff that's got the Northeast it's just culminating. Fran Brown. Look, y'all, I
underrated
when people mocked that and they said, what is this hire? And those that know, like yourself, we just listened to, are like, no, Fran can do some things. Like he's going to move some bodies down to Georgia. Fear not on that one. So, I love that. John, this is about the time of the podcast where we want to let the listeners know what you do, where they can find you. And then also, brother, I give an open platform. Is there anything in the world you want to talk about for a minute? I give you open airtime. So tell the people where they can find you and what you want to talk about.
Yeah, real simple. Let's talk ball on Twitter every single day at John Garcia_JR. My written work's still there at Sports Illustrated as well. And yeah, it's just a fun time of year. This is it's crazy, it's hectic, it's December, it's the holidays, it's the end of the year, it's the playoff push, it's recruiting and the portal and NIL. Just enjoy it, especially for your audience. Just enjoy it. You are one of 4 programs that will get to watch all of this happen while chasing a national championship. And look, this year was about the unexpected, except for Georgia. So that status, that feel of this thing ain't changing for a while, enjoy it while you got it. You knew how long it was in between
Yes.
getting that natty and getting back there and winning it. Enjoy this part of the ride because it should last a while. But again, this sport is crazy for a reason. So it could change at the drop of a hat. Enjoy the next few weeks. And yeah, you'll have a top finish, I would imagine, on the field, in recruiting and the portal. So enjoy that trifecta while you got it.
Ooh, yeah, we tell people all the time that want to complain, like when we struggle against Mizzou or another team, and people want to say, oh my gosh, Georgia should be pounding these people. And I tell them, like, football was made to be difficult, y'all. Like, I know we should be, but football is a sport that is insanely hard, and it's insanely hard to stay at the top. So we've been telling them, enjoy the ride. This is the heyday. This is the golden years of Georgia. Soak it in, everybody. He is John Garcia. Go follow him. He's a great follower. He's got some great insight. Interact with him. He loves being it. John, thank you for being with us today, brother.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll see you guys next week on Locked On Bulldogs.